The forest's dark secret. The sun hung low on the horizon as Sarah and Mark ventured into the heart of the ancient forest. They were experienced hikers, seeking adventure far from the beaten path. Tall trees loomed overhead, their thick canopies blocking out most of the daylight, casting the forest floor into a perpetual twilight. Their footsteps echoed eerily as they walked deeper into the woods, their sense of isolation growing with every step. The silence was broken only by the rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of a distant bird. As the hours passed, Sarah and Mark became aware of an odd sensation, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. It was as if the very air around them had grown heavy and oppressive. Unease settled over them, but they attributed it to the natural isolation of the forest. Night fell, and they set up camp, their tent pitched beneath the towering trees. They shared stories and laughter by the dim glow of a campfire, trying to dispel the growing unease that lingered in the air. Just as they were about to retire to their tent, they heard it, a distant mournful howl that sent shivers down their spines. It was like nothing they had ever heard before, a haunting cry that seemed to carry on the wind. Mark grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, scanning the darkness. "It's probably just a wolf," he reassured Sarah. But the unease in his voice betrayed his doubt. They heard the howl again, closer this time, and they retreated into their tent, zipping it shut. Inside, they listened to the eerie chorus of howls that seemed to surround them. Sleep eluded them as the night wore on and the howling persisted. With the first light of dawn, they emerged from their tent, relieved that the night had passed without incident. However, as they examined the campsite, they made a chilling discovery. Deep claw marks marred the trees surrounding their tent, and the ground was littered with tufts of dark, matted fur. Fear gnawed at them as they packed up their camp and decided to leave the forest. They retraced their steps, anxious to put the strange night behind them. But as they walked, the oppressive atmosphere in the woods seemed to intensify. Hours passed, and they realized with growing horror that the forest had become an inescapable labyrinth. Every path they took led them back to the same location, as if the woods itself conspired to keep them captive. Exhausted and disoriented, they continued to wander, the forest's dark secret closing in around them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they heard the howling again, closer and more menacing than ever. Desperation drove them to seek refuge in a decrepit, long-abandoned cabin they stumbled upon. Inside, the air was thick with decay and the scent of damp wood. The walls were adorned with strange symbols, and the floor was covered in dried leaves. Hours turned into days as they huddled in the cabin, their supplies dwindling. The howling outside never ceased, and they knew they were not alone in the forest. Something sinister lurked in the shadows, stalking them with malevolent intent. As their strength waned, they discovered a journal hidden in a dusty corner of the cabin. Its pages were filled with the ramblings of a previous occupant, a hiker who had also become lost in the forest. His entries grew increasingly frantic, describing encounters with an otherworldly presence that seemed to control the very fabric of the forest itself. With each passing day, Sarah and Mark's fear grew, their belief in the supernatural horrors of the forest solidifying. They were trapped, and there seemed to be no way out. On the fourth night in the cabin, the howling reached a crescendo. The walls of the cabin shook as if the forest itself were trying to tear them apart. In a desperate bid to escape, they burst through the cabin's door and ran blindly into the woods. As they sprinted through the darkness, they saw glimpses of twisted, shadowy figures moving among the trees, their eyes glowing with an unholy light. The forest seemed to come alive, its ancient trees reaching out to ensnare them. Sarah and Mark ran until their legs could carry them no longer. Exhausted and on the brink of collapse, they stumbled upon a small, ancient stone altar hidden deep within the forest. In their desperation, they offered a prayer, a plea for escape. To their astonishment, a faint, ethereal light appeared above the altar, illuminating their path to safety. They followed it through the winding woods until they finally emerged, battered and bruised, onto a familiar trail. The forest's dark secret remained hidden, but Sarah and Mark had escaped its clutches. They never spoke of the horrors they had witnessed, knowing that the ancient woods held secrets that were better left undisturbed.